Hello, my name is Stephen D. Filippo. At the moment, I'm calling from Perth, which is a city in Western Australia, in the sort of like outer metropolitan sort of rift between the country and the city. But normally I'd be in San Diego, California. But unfortunately, well, I made the decision to head back for a cold winter,
Hmm.
and subsequently have been in many forms of isolation
Yeah.
since then.
Yeah, Australia has a lot of quarantine procedures.
Yes, so I had to have a good 2 weeks in a hotel, which they've started charging people for, but I didn't get charged for the luxury of being imprisoned in the hotel, where they would have security watching you, making sure you can't go outside. And then once I flew back to the West Coast, I had to do another 2 weeks. So the whole writing process of this piece has mainly been done within my isolated containment.
Mhm. How's the,
But what was the second half of your question
I'm
then?
going to say the second half of the question was, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you started in music?
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's one of those difficult questions because you can either like pinpoint on like your first like musical memory of like the doing, but I think at some point, no, I will, I will do that. I think initially my parents pushed me into learning how to play the piano as just as a way for me to spend time with my grandmother. So a lot of my like earliest musical memories were like me doing the 20-minute walk to go to my grandmother's house through these back alleys of like a local fishmonger. And then, her sort of listening while half watching The Young and Restless and The Days of Our Lives.
Oh dear.
But then at some
Backstory.
point, it just became like this thing. And then at some point that just becomes your identity, right? And you just can't, I couldn't really, it got to a point where, you leave a high school and you have to sort of pick a thing that you want to do. And at that point I had like a lot of like discouragement. Like I failed my like leaving music exams, but I thought I would just take a stab at doing a tertiary course. And then eventually I started writing music and people somehow got interested in that. And then what started off as me just sort of gigging and playing in bands and whatnot ended up being me liaising with like orchestral musicians in this whole other weird relationship with music.
Hmm.
And the art music, especially as a composer, it has a lot less, I feel, in common with perhaps contemporary popular music making than perhaps the relationship that like a visual artist has with their creation. In that sense, it feels like a very different sort of game environment. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
Well, you have a different
it's
relationship to the thing that you're making. You have a different relationship with the people who are experiencing the thing that you make. And
yeah,
yeah,
definitely. It wasn't until a while that I actually realized what, the function of a composer even was. I think it was well into doing a university degree, or even like around when I was like a teenager. My idea of a person that made music was a songwriter, a singer-songwriter. And I just didn't really think about this form of music, let alone experimental art music or like an idea of like pushing musical limitations that never even occurred to me, even though I was still absorbing that sort of music through different mediums, and even sort of like progressive, like contemporary popular music. But some somehow someone introduced me to the Ligeti piano pieces, and I think that was like a starting point into reassessing the way that I can think about music or like a musical event. And it's yeah, I guess that was just a turning point which sort of like completely started transforming the way I think about music. It never occurred to me that someone would spend that much time behind just or how much time it would take behind to be behind a manuscript.
Right.
It just wasn't a form of creation that really occurred to me until I got to an academic environment, and the only reason I went there is because I wanted to learn more about music in general. So I never really had that like classical music education until I got to this tertiary environment, and then suddenly I'm having to, remember names of a lot of dead European
A
people.
lot of kids never
I feel like that journey or whatever is somehow reflective in the music that I'm making still, or perhaps it's like reflective in the ways that I want to relate with like a performer that I'm working with, or whatnot. I'm not too sure. I think so. And it was also important when I was, performing as a part of a choir,
Mm,
as a singer was, and just like learning because these were all really like new environments for me. I'd never been a singer until I started like embracing classical music, I guess. Um, just because I conveniently had I guess, a low range voice, and that sort of just led its own pathway anyway. But it was just about learning how these different musical environments actually function.
mhm.
And they're also distinct to each other. So I guess the role as like a composer or an artistic like director is you have to be so malleable to these sort of musical circumstances in a
Sure,
sense.
sure, sure.
But that's also quite the really like fun part of it as well, because you're also like performing your role as this person that has like the knowledge of the piece of music that's being performed, and that's also like quite an interesting sort of position to be in as well, because you have to gift the people that you're working with enough knowledge to be able to interpret the music, which in then turn also puts their interpretation of the acts that you're making them do.
Sure.
And then that gets all really complicated in itself as well. But it's this really interesting interplay of like people's personality, experiences, performance, all coming together and to create a product, a happening. An important part of at least the music that I'm writing is that, and I guess, to whoever's watching, if you were to look at like a score of mine, there's like a sort of interplay between like really specific acts and then perhaps like a more open interpretive notation. So I really want to be able to provide, I guess, an environment where like both of us as like creative entities can exist within a piece of music to some extent.
Mhm.
That it's not just me dictating a set of actions for a performer to do, but it's also they have agency in putting creative direction to like the piece of music.
Great. Um, I was wondering if there's anything in particular outside of music that you are that's really important to you in your life, non-musical.
Ooh. It's also very big. um,
You don't have to answer it, or you can just give us one simple thing.
I don't want to be the only person that has like this such a small world that it's only.
My life is myopic.
um, what do I really value? Yeah, and I read this and I was still like really stumped on it as well. Um,
It might not be an answer that's an answer. I mean, it can, it doesn't have to have a definite,
it just seems odd to like list like a list of hobbies or something. But I think the whole theme of everything that I've been saying, I think just comes back to just really enjoying human engagement.
well,
But that's also like a big like my because I did a joint degree in my undergraduate. The other part of that was in cultural and social anthropology.
Ah,
So maybe that's a link in there. And I do enjoy reading like a lot of like social theory, but then that also feels like just me listing like this other hobby. But
you know,
I guess we can go with that. Pardon?
they seem very related.
I think so.
Yeah,
And I think that sort of reinforces some of the thoughts that I've been having about or have about music
definitely.
after finishing my PhD studies, my graduate studies, figure out ways that I can bring at least more like artistic engagement. There's some really great organizations that are sponsored by the West Australian government that are also doing that. But to be able to bring, I guess, this sort of experimental music or this new art music out into places that wouldn't be able to access it because it was something that I wasn't aware at all existed. And I think all of us can admit how small of a community this is within the entire sphere of musical practice.
Sure.
So I am quite interested and passionate about ways that you can increase engagement to new classical music. And I definitely feel like this video project is like a step in that direction as well because we're like adjusting to this pandemic experience and able to put together, you know, a musical product into these circumstances. Yeah.
Great. Well, super. Well,
Sorry, that
thanks
was a
so
bit
much.
long-winded.
That was fine. That was really great. Thanks for taking the time to talk, and
Yeah, thank you.